In Iran, the Kerman province has long been the hub of their pistachio production, and since March 21, they have lost $227 million worth of their crop. They had estimated that 70,000 tons would be harvested this year, but they have lost 90% of that. In the Turkish city of Mus, watermelons in a field of 3 million square feet were damaged by a hailstorm that lasted for 5 hours. They say it's $40,000 worth, but a hailstorm lasting $5. This is another one of those atmospheric compression events, such as the hurricane that is currently drowning South Carolina. In Germany, they are having a potato shortage after a record hot, dry summer. According to German officials, an anticipated fall in potato yields from 11.7 million tons to 8.5 million tons could thereby lead to an increase in consumer prices, with prices going up by as much as 30%. In New Zealand, people who grow something called feijoa think they're going to be put out of business. This crop is being devastated by a fungal disease. One grower has lost a third of his trees. One of the farmers says that none of the growers in Kerikeri will break even. Some are even ripping out their entire crops, and others are closing down. In the Philippines, the typhoon Mangkhut has caused a dramatic reduction in rice in some areas. They have lost a total of 250,000 tons of paddy rice, exceeding a worst-case forecast by 60%. In the Indian district of Kodagu, floods have destroyed about 60% of the coffee berries, and this state produces about 40% of India's coffee. Australia curbs supplies. At the present, Asian wheat importers, including the world's biggest buyer, Indonesia, are buying most of their wheat from the Black Sea region. But Russia and Ukraine are expected to run out of surplus supplies by the end of the year due to a reduction in output and a strong demand for exports. So this is kind of the knock-on effect that David Dubine talks about in some cases. The assumption is that if we have a shortage in one area, it can be made up in another area, but then when there are shortages every place, it just drives up the prices in every place. And this is certainly a sign of the times, where a group of thieves have stolen almost the entire grape harvest from a vineyard. I was hearing stories about this happening in France last year, and they were putting armed guards into the field. So you're going to see more and more of this, having to protect your food against bandits of various kinds. And in the USA, mid-Missouri farmers are expecting large corn yield losses due to drought. And just a few weeks ago, the USDA was going out and saying things are going to be pretty good, but other people were saying, well, we'll see. And they've been out looking in the fields, and we're seeing a reduction in production. Along with lower crop yields, crop quality will most likely be lower as well due to extreme heat. So in Somalia, in 2016 and 2017, they faced a devastating drought which put the lives of millions at risk. This led to water scarcity, depletion of pasture, widespread food insecurity, and livestock mortality. By the end of 2016 and most of 2017, erratic rainfall in the Sanag region resulted in insufficient water that led to sharp increases in the price of water. The urban population grew significantly, partly due to the increased number of internally displaced persons who lost their pastoral livelihoods during the drought. So here you see more knock-on effects. In India's Kerala process, they had incessant rainfall between August 8 and 15, and it is estimated that there was about 550 million rupees in lost crops due to that. About 3,393 hectares have been impacted. 67 people have died in the calamity. So this is like what's happening in North Carolina and such, where just huge rains are destroying everything. In Spain, production of something called the kaki will fall by more than 30%. The frosts of late November last year, as well as the frosts and hailstorms recorded in the spring and summer this year, have entailed a reduction in Valencia's estimated kaki production. For now, the total volume in the harvest is expected to fall by more than 30%. Frosts have affected 80% of our own production. Last year's frost had already left us without fruit in the last stage of the campaign, and frosts in the spring of this year, together with hailstorms, have significantly reduced our production in one of the main areas for the cultivation of kakis. And so here we see a pattern of the grand solar minimum with cold springs, delayed planting, and early cold weather in the fall, which also affects the quality of crop. In Fiji, they've had a loss of livestock, about 4,000 to 5,000 head since 2014 due to tuberculosis, which resulted in a reduction in milk production. Some people have lost 45% of their total stock, and you really wonder whether or not changing climate, for instance, has made the cattle more susceptible to this disease. As I reported a few days ago, the North Carolina tobacco crop is at risk from Hurricane Florence. Crop losses could reach as high as $300 million, assuming a 100% loss of what's still in the field. They expect to harvest 159,000 acres this year. And I think, we've seen like 3 feet of rain in some places. We see the flooding still increasing. We see that the land will be saturated for a long time, and we also see more hurricanes coming in from the east, which may just add to the misery in this case. In Australia, drought damage revealed as grain forecasts dropped 12%. The periods of heavy drought that rocked eastern Australia this year have had their predicted effect, as the damage to crops and livestock has destroyed a sizable proportion of the total grain crop. Government report says there is a year-on-year drop of 12% in winter grain production, with about 33 million tons of wheat, canola, barley, oats, and other pulses, which is 9% below the 20% average, which shows just how hard it has been to keep production outputs as high as possible during a difficult climate. The nation posted 59 million tons of crops just 2 years ago, and now 33 million. In Australia, they are estimating that the wheat rust damage bill could be $1.4 billion over the course of a decade. About 30% of current wheat varieties show moderate to high susceptibility to the UG99 strain of wheat stem rust. And in India, after they've had floods, the pineapple farmers are facing a crisis, basically due to plant diseases following flooding. Fungal diseases and rot are the major problems. And what they're saying is that although only about 5% of the plants went underwater during severe flooding in August, about 50% of the fruits over the coming months, 3 months, may be lost to diseases. In addition to that, deformation and stunted growth will lead to losses. And this also applies to North Carolina, where you have rot and fungus coming to the crops that are just about to be harvested. In Pakistan, a lack of rain is affecting the vineyards, and it says the Pakistani province of Baluchistan is famous for natural resources. It is also a cultivation hub of varied types of fruits. Grapes grow in abundance in various districts. Lately, however, grapes imported from Afghanistan have been causing damage to the profits of the local traders. There's a lack of rain that has helped reduce yields. In Canada, Nova Scotia has lost as much as 50% of its apple crop in 2018. Below freezing temperatures in June played a big part, and the hardest hit crops were in areas at low elevations. One man said 99% of his crops died due to freezing temperatures, resulting in about a 75% drop in sales. People who normally sell produce that they produce themselves are buying it elsewhere to sell to their customers. So here again, more knock-on effects. In Pakistan, dry weather is destroying standing crops. This is in the district of Mansehra, And the drought has also created a shortage of clean drinking water. People are relying on water tankers for their domestic needs. In the U.S. state of Colorado, in Morgan County, they had a 30% loss in production due to storms. Some crops were affected more than others, but the overall effects of what was lost are likely to ripple through the community for some time to come. If you had a 30% reduction in your income, what would that do to your ability to maintain your lifestyle? This was one of the places where they had large amounts of hail up to the size of baseballs. They had straight-line winds up to 100 miles an hour. They had 3 tornadoes. In India, after floods, Karnataka stares at drought. For the state in India, it has been a mix of too much and too little. They had a bounteous southwest monsoon which produced devastating floods and landslides in 7 districts, and then another 15 districts are having severe drought. In some places, due to floods and landslides, all the topsoil has been washed away, so that impairs their ability to grow crops in the future. In the USA, flooding is ruining crops and wiping out community gardens amid an already tight market. And this, of course, is the major point. The market's already tight, and we're having further damage. It says it could take years for local farmers to recover. Damage to yields is visible just about anywhere there was flooding. This is in Wisconsin. And it says even though most fields are insured by about 75%, they still have lost their profits after the insurance payments. They're saying that the produce from any garden that has been flooded shouldn't be eaten because it'd be contaminated. Mitchell says that there are contaminants that come with floodwater that may have gotten inside the meat of the vegetables that can't be washed off. Sewage getting into floodwaters, where there are industrial facilities, there may be all kinds of chemicals that get into the floodwaters, and this gets absorbed into the plants and in turn into the people. On Electroverse, the Aussie drought leaves Asia turning to Argentina for wheat. Many key wheat exporting nations have faced severe droughts in recent months, and traditional sources of supply are struggling to fill all of Asia's needs. Australia lowered its wheat forecast by 13%, as a crippling drought across the country's east coast has cut output to a 10-year low. At the same time, Russia and Ukraine are expected to run out of surplus supplies by the end of the year, forcing buyers to seek shipments from alternative origins. But wheat output in Argentina is expected to climb just 1.5 million tons to 19.5 million tons from last year's 18 million tons. And here we have, the food problem showing up in Asia, which is the source of so many of our manufactured products. The trade wars between China and the United States are already leading to threats that China will just flat out tinker with the supply chains of some companies, and then we have this chance of social disruption, which will cause even more problems. In New Zealand, farmers have lost 100,000 lambs after brutal spring storms. They have had a cruel start to spring for New Zealand farmers, with the first week delivering well below average temperatures, heavy snow, and torrential rain, all the grand solar minimum stuff predicted by cosmic rays, cloud nucleation, atmospheric compression events. And these are the lambs, which means that at whatever period of time the lambs would be more grown and ready to go to slaughter, they won't be there. In Australia, a big freeze at the beginning of spring has caused temperature records to tumble, and fierce frosts have shattered harvest hopes. Some places are getting 10 degrees below average, 10 degrees centigrade below average for this time of year. And in terms of harvesting, a Nyabing farmer named Scott Crosby has reported major damage to his cereal crops. It's not going to be a fun harvest, he said. There was some comment that it wouldn't be too bad because the crop is late, but few crops like -5 degrees centigrade, regardless of the crop stage. What we need is rain ASAP to reduce the damage. If it stays dry, the damage will be great, and the odds are that it did stay dry. In Canada, heavy snow has brought harvest to a standstill, and this picture alone tells a lot of the tale, that the snow causes the heads of the wheat to bend over, which puts them at risk of being difficult to harvest, and also damaged as the snow melts off them. One man says he has 90% of his crops left in the field, but the harvest is at a standstill. And in late summer, they had a couple of weeks of incredible smoke cover from wildfires that blocked the sun and stalled the crop. So we were already harvesting 10 days later than normal. Add an early snowfall on top of that, and harvest is really delayed here. A surprise snow has brought an end to the pumpkin growing season. The harvest is underway early at many Alberta farms after some unexpected snow. For now, the still green pumpkins are sitting safe under their snow blankets, but they won't be growing anymore. A few weeks before Halloween, they'll be brought indoors to finish maturing in cozy greenhouses, but that's probably an extra cost. So the bad news continues unabated, and what we all need to do for ourselves is to grow what we can. Microgreens are an excellent way to do this. If you have maybe even 5 or 10 trays and start something every few days, you will find that you will have quite an abundance of fresh, nutritious, tasty vegetables to eat on a daily basis.